He walked into that room wearing worn shoes and a borrowed tie, and every person in that building wrote him off before he opened his mouth. They saw a quiet single father past his prime, a nobody with gaps in his resume and shadows under his eyes. They didn't see the Navy SEAL beneath the silence. They didn't see what he'd buried, the betrayal that destroyed his career, the brother he couldn't save, the truth that had been locked away for 11 years. But the enemy inside Northstar Aeronautics saw him, and they were terrified. If you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, now is the time, because this story is going to pull you in and not let go until the very last second. Hit that like button, drop your city and country in the comments below so I can see exactly how far this story has traveled, and stay with me until the end. You will not want to miss what's coming. The security tryout at Northstar Aeronautics was held in a converted training room on the building's 4th floor, polished floors, mirrored walls, the faint smell of rubber mats and industrial cleaner. 12 candidates had shown up that Tuesday morning. Most of them looked the part, pressed tactical shirts, custom boots, the kind of jawlines that belonged on corporate security brochures. Rowan Striker showed up in slacks that needed pressing and a jacket he'd bought off a clearance rack 3 years ago because Cassidy had told him he couldn't wear the gray one anymore. She said it made him look like a parking enforcement officer. He was 37. He stood 5'11", which wasn't particularly imposing. He had a lean, quiet build, the kind that doesn't announce itself. His hands were steady, always steady, and his eyes moved differently than other people's eyes, not darting, not restless, but slow and deliberate, like a man running calculations behind a still face. He sat at the end of the row of candidates and filled out his intake form with a ballpoint pen that kept skipping, and didn't talk to anyone. The other candidates talked plenty. 2 of them had done private protection work in overseas conflict zones. One had spent 6 years in a federal executive security detail. They compared credentials with the easy confidence of men who had never been told their credentials weren't enough. Rowan listened without appearing to listen, which was a skill he'd spent a long time developing. The woman running the preliminary intake was a Northstar HR coordinator named Priya, who looked like she was about 24 and had the particular efficiency of someone deeply unhappy about the amount of paperwork generated by this event. She processed them alphabetically. When she got to Striker, she paused. It says, "Here you left your previous security position," and she squinted at the form 4 years ago. That's right. And before that, military service. Yes, branch? Rowan looked at her evenly. Navy. She made a small note and moved on. She didn't ask a follow-up. He didn't offer one. The 12 candidates were eventually moved into an observation room adjacent to the training floor, where they could see Northstar's chief executive officer through a floor-to-ceiling window. She was in the middle of a brief, surrounded by 4 men in matching dark blazers who were supposed to be her current protection detail, the team being partially replaced by this evaluation process. Adeline Marwick was 30 years old. She'd taken control of Northstar Aeronautics 14 months earlier after her father's stroke, stepping into the role of CEO of a defense-adjacent aerospace company that most of her board hadn't believed she was capable of running. She had a precise, assembled, quality dark hair pulled back, sharp eyes behind frameless glasses, the posture of someone who'd spent her entire life being watched and had learned to carry that weight without flinching. She was speaking about a timeline adjustment in the drone development program, and even through the glass, even from that distance, Rowan could see that she wasn't nervous. She was focused. That was different. He also noticed something else. 2 of the 4 guards surrounding her had their backs to the room's south corridor. The 3rd had positioned himself between Adeline and the window, blocking an exit, not a threat. And the 4th was watching Adeline instead of the room. They were protecting her from things they could see. That was the problem with most protection work. It trained people to watch the subject instead of watching the space. Rowan said nothing. The candidates were eventually brought onto the training floor for the physical evaluation component, which was run by Northstar's senior bodyguard, a man named Damon Krell. Damon was built like a structural wall, broad across the shoulders, thick through the neck, with the particular swagger of a man who'd been the most physically imposing person in every room he'd entered for the past 15 years. He wore his confidence the way other men wore cologne, a little too much of it, and you noticed it first. He walked the line of candidates slowly, looking each one over with a flat, evaluating expression. When he reached Rowan, he stopped. Damon took in the jacket, the worn shoes, the form he was holding, which he'd clearly already read, because his expression shifted into something that was almost amused. 4 years out of active work, Damon said. Something like that, Rowan said. In this business, 4 years is permanent retirement. Damon said it pleasantly, the way someone delivers an insult when they're confident the target can't do anything about it. We're protecting the CEO of a $9 billion aerospace company. This isn't Neighborhood Watch. A few of the candidates smiled. One of them, the one who'd done federal executive protection, made no expression at all, which Rowan noted as a sign of actual professionalism. I understand, Rowan said. Damon studied him another moment. You ever been on a protection detail before? Yes. For who? Rowan didn't answer immediately. He was watching the south corridor again through the open training room door because something about the positioning of the two guards outside had shifted in the last 4 minutes, and he was deciding whether it meant anything. Rowan. He looked at Damon. Sorry, what was the question? The amusement dropped out of Damon's expression. He didn't like being ignored. He really didn't like being ignored in front of an audience. He stepped forward onto the mat and gestured for Rowan to follow. On the mat. Rowan stepped onto the mat. What happened next took 7 seconds, which Rowan always found to be about 5 seconds longer than it needed to be. Damon moved first, a controlled shove designed to test balance and reaction, which was a standard opener and not particularly creative. Rowan let the shove redirect his weight, pivoted on his back foot, and used Damon's own momentum to rotate him. He didn't throw him hard. He didn't need to. Damon went down flat on his back on the mat with a sound that was more surprised than pained, and Rowan stepped back to his original position as if he'd simply moved out of the way of something falling. The room went quiet. Rowan barely looked at Damon. He was already looking at the door, where Adeline Marwick had appeared. She'd apparently finished her brief early and had been watching from the threshold. Rowan didn't know how much she'd seen, but based on the expression on the face of the guard behind her, at least enough. Adeline's expression was unreadable. Her eyes moved from Damon, who was getting to his feet with the careful dignity of a man recalibrating his self-assessment, to Rowan, who was standing quietly with his hands at his sides. That was fast, she said. The technique wasn't complicated, Rowan said. He telegraphed the approach. Damon had gotten upright. His jaw was tight. Lucky positioning, he said, which was a lie, and everyone in the room knew it. Adeline looked at Rowan for another moment. Then she looked around the room slowly at her guards, at the candidates, at the training space, and something shifted in her expression. Not warmth exactly. More like attention. Like a recalibration of her own. Your name, she said. Rowan Striker. And what do you do when you're not throwing my senior bodyguard onto training mats? Mr. Striker? Mostly I take my daughter to campus and back, Rowan said. She's in her 2nd year of college. She likes jazz and hates when I hover. Something moved through Adeline's expression, not quite a smile, but close. And before that, Rowan looked at her directly. He'd had this moment before. The moment where the question came, and he had to decide how much of it to give. He'd been giving as little as possible for 11 years, because giving more only led to more questions, and more questions led to the part of the story he'd spent a long time learning to carry in silence. Before that, I was in the Navy, he said. Adeline waited. Special operations, he added. He didn't say the word SEAL. He almost never said the word. It attracted a certain kind of attention reverence from some people, skepticism from others, and both were equally useless to him. What he was now was a man with a specific set of skills, a specific way of thinking, and a 19-year-old daughter who needed her rent covered while she studied music theory. That was the relevant information. Adeline nodded slowly. Then she looked toward her protection detail, specifically at the two guards near the south corridor. Rowan, she said, without looking back at him. You've been watching that corridor since you walked in. It wasn't a question. Yes, he said. Why? Because your detail isn't. He paused. 4 guards on a $9 billion CEO. 2 of them have their backs to your secondary exit. One of them is positioned to block your view of the room rather than the room's view of you. The 4th has been watching your face for the last 20 minutes instead of the space around you. He stopped. They're watching you, Ms. Marwick, not the exits. The room was very quiet. Adeline turned to look at him fully. Something in her expression had changed, the same slight shift he'd seen earlier, but more pronounced now. It wasn't unease. It was the specific expression of someone who'd already had a nagging instinct confirmed by an outside source and wasn't sure yet how to feel about being right. She was quiet for a long moment, then 7 days. Damon looked up. Adeline, 7-day trial, she said, still looking at Rowan. You work my detail. We reassess at the end of the week. Understood, Rowan said. He didn't say thank you. He wasn't sure she wanted that. He started the next morning. Adeline's schedule that day included an internal operations meeting at 9, a lunch with 2 department heads that had been moved twice already, and a late afternoon walkthrough of the drone development lab with her senior engineering team. Rowan read the full day's itinerary in the lobby while drinking the worst coffee he'd encountered since active duty, which was saying something. Cassidy had texted him at 7:15 first day jitters. He'd written back, "I don't get jitters." She'd sent back 3 eye-roll emojis and a photo of her cat sitting on his navy jacket, which was her way of communicating multiple things simultaneously. The operations meeting ran long. Adeline ran it herself, which Rowan hadn't expected. He'd assumed the department heads drove these briefings, and she drove it with the precision of someone who'd done her preparation the night before and expected everyone else to have done the same. 2 of the 6 people in the room clearly hadn't. She didn't embarrass them. She rerouted around them, which was more effective and, Rowan suspected, more intimidating. He stood near the door. He watched the room. At 11:40, when the meeting broke, one of the department heads, a man named Ferrara, who ran Northstar's logistics division, paused beside Rowan on his way out. "You're new," Ferrara said. First day, Rowan confirmed. Ferrara looked at him with the mildly assessing expression of a man who managed large teams and had developed a habit of categorizing people quickly. "You're quieter than the usual detail. I'll take that as a compliment." Ferrara smiled and left. Rowan filed the interaction away without knowing why it was a habit, cataloging things that felt slightly off-register without being able to articulate exactly what was wrong with them. Ferrara's question had been perfectly ordinary. His timing had been slightly odd. Men who ran logistics divisions didn't usually pause to introduce themselves to new security personnel on their way to their next meeting. It wasn't sinister, it was just slightly off. He filed it away. Lunch ran without incident. Adeline ate half a salad and spent the rest of the time talking about supply chain adjustments. She drank sparkling water. She had a way of listening to people that made them feel heard without revealing what she actually thought about what they were saying, a useful quality in a CEO and slightly unnerving in a human being. Rowan stayed near the exit. At 3 in the afternoon, while Adeline was in the engineering lab for the drone walkthrough, Rowan used a 30-minute window to pull Northstar's internal incident log. He had authorization as a trial detail member. Damon had given him access that morning, with the resigned expression of a man who'd been instructed to be cooperative and was cooperating minimally. He read through the incident log, looking for the 2 previous threats against Adeline that the briefing materials had referenced. The first had occurred 8 months ago, an unauthorized vehicle that had followed her convoy for 6 blocks before security lost it in traffic. The second, 5 months ago, an unverified tip about a threat to the building that had required a brief evacuation. 2 incidents, moderately serious on their own. Together interesting. He cross-referenced the dates with Northstar's internal calendar and security scheduling records. Then he stopped. Both incidents had occurred at locations, the specific route taken during the first pursuit, the specific building entrance used during the second evacuation that appeared in Northstar's confidential security files. Not public knowledge, not guessable. Internal operational documents distributed to a limited list of authorized personnel. Rowan sat back in the chair and looked at the screen. Someone with authorized access had known where Adeline would be. Both times. The threat wasn't external. He spent the next 45 minutes building a list of every person with access to the relevant security files during both incident windows. The list was longer than it should have been. Security access in this building had grown organically over years without consistent auditing, which was its own problem, but one name appeared in both windows at the top of every relevant clearance level. Malcolm Vane, Security Director, 11 years with Northstar. Extensive internal access. The kind of tenure that made people invisible because they'd been around so long that no one looked at them anymore. Rowan wrote the name on a notepad, looked at it, and then folded the notepad and put it in his jacket pocket. He didn't have evidence. He had a pattern. Patterns weren't accusations. But he was going to be watching Malcolm Vane very carefully. He walked back toward the engineering lab and found Adeline at the threshold, wrapping up with her lead engineer, a tall man named Sorensen, who was explaining something about sensor calibration with the barely contained enthusiasm of someone who'd been waiting to talk about sensor calibration for 3 weeks. Adeline saw Rowan coming. She finished the conversation with Sorensen, thanked him, and fell into beside Rowan as they moved toward the elevator. "You look like you found something," she said. "I'm not sure yet." That usually means you found something. He glanced at her. How would you know what that looks like on me? You've known me for 32 hours. 32 hours and 4 minutes, she said. And I run a company. I've learned to read what people look like when they're trying to decide whether to tell you something uncomfortable. She pressed the elevator call button. What did you find? Rowan looked at the elevator doors. The 2 previous incidents against you, the convoy pursuit and the building evacuation. Both locations were in your confidential security files before they happened. The elevator arrived. They stepped in, the doors closed. Adeline was quiet for 3 floors. You think it's someone internal, she said. I think someone with internal access has been feeding information. I don't know to whom yet, and I don't know why. Malcolm runs security, she said. It wasn't a defense, it was information. I know. He's been here 11 years, I know. She looked at him. Do you have proof? No. Another pause. The elevator reached the executive floor. The doors opened and Adeline stepped out first. She walked 3 paces into the corridor and then stopped, her back to him, and was quiet for a moment. Then we don't move on it yet, she said. Agreed. She turned around. Her expression was composed, but something behind it was not. It was the particular expression of someone who'd suspected something for longer than they wanted to admit, and had just been handed confirmation they weren't ready for. You tell me when you have something real, she said. Not before. Yes, Rowan said. She nodded once, then walked toward her office. Rowan watched her go, then turned and looked back down the corridor in the other direction, the direction of Malcolm Vane's office, which was at the far end of the executive floor, with a clear view of Adeline's door. He stood there for a moment. The enemy wasn't trying to break into Northstar. The enemy had been here for 11 years, and Rowan had just announced, by walking through that front door, that someone was finally paying attention. Rowan didn't sleep well that first night, which was normal. He hadn't slept well since 2013, which was also normal. Or at least it had become normal, in the way that chronic pain becomes normal. You stop expecting anything different, and you build your life around the edges of it. He was back at Northstar by 6:15 the next morning, an hour before Adeline was scheduled to arrive. He used the time to walk every floor between the parking structure and the executive level, checking stairwells, service corridors, camera positions, and the 3 locations where the building's internal security feed had blind spots that the current system hadn't been updated to address. He wrote everything down in a small notebook with a mechanical pencil because he didn't trust digital notes for operational observations, not in a building where he suspected someone with systems access was already compromised. He also changed Adeline's arrival route. He didn't ask permission. He called the overnight logistics coordinator, explained that he was adjusting the morning convoy protocol as part of his trial assessment, and rerouted the approach from the main entrance on Meridian Avenue to the building's east side loading dock, which wasn't glamorous but had 2 clear sight lines, fewer pedestrian choke points, and a direct elevator access to the executive floor that bypassed the lobby entirely. When Adeline arrived and realized she was being walked through a loading dock, she stopped moving for exactly 1 second. This is the loading dock, she said. Yes, I'm the CEO.
I know.
She looked at him. Then she looked at the loading dock, the industrial shelving units, the dolly racks, the fluorescent lighting that gave everyone in the room the complexion of a person recovering from something. Then she started walking again. Fine. I'll have a more permanent route adjustment ready by end of week, Rowan said. This is temporary until I've mapped all the access points. You haven't been here 48 hours. No. She glanced sideways at him as they reached the elevator. Is this what you were like in the Navy? Worse, he said. Something at the corner of her mouth moved, almost involuntarily. She covered it by looking at her phone. My 9 o'clock is pushed to 9:30. I need the 20 minutes. You'll have it. The elevator doors opened. They stepped in. Rowan had already decided that morning that he was going to divide Adeline's daily schedule into compartments split across multiple members of the detail so that no single person had the complete picture of where she'd be at any given time. It was a simple operational principle, and it was one that Northstar's current detail had never implemented. Everyone on the team had access to everything, which meant that if one person on the team was compromised, the entire schedule was exposed. He implemented the compartmentalization that afternoon, quietly, without announcing it as a change in protocol. He simply started routing information differently, sending partial schedules to individual team members, keeping the connecting pieces to himself. Damon noticed within 3 hours. He found Rowan in the corridor outside the executive conference room at 2:30. He looked like a man who'd been working up to this conversation since morning. "You changed the route this morning," Damon said. "Yes," without clearing it with me. "You're not my commanding officer," Rowan said. He said it without heat, which was somehow worse than if he'd been hostile about it. "I'm on a trial. My job is to assess and improve the security environment. Changing an established route that I identified as a vulnerability is part of that." Damon was quiet for a moment. He had the look of a man wrestling with two impulses, the professional one, which recognized that the route change was objectively justified, and the personal one, which still remembered the mat. "The detail needs to know when the protocol changes," he said finally. They were told. "By you. Yes, I run the detail." Rowan looked at him. "Then run it." "I'm not competing with you, Damon. I'm trying to keep her alive." He paused. "Or at least keep her out of whatever this is." Damon's jaw tightened. "Whatever what is." Rowan studied him for a moment long enough that Damon noticed he was being assessed, which was uncomfortable. What Rowan was deciding, in that moment, was how much of what he'd found to share with the man who currently ran Adeline's protection, and who might or might not be part of the problem. He didn't think Damon was dirty. Damon was too openly combative, too personally invested in his own status, too nakedly territorial to be running a coordinated deception. Dirty people were usually smoother. Damon was sandpaper. "I'll send you the full route adjustment document tonight," Rowan said. "Walk it with me tomorrow morning before she arrives." It wasn't an olive branch exactly. It was more like an operational accommodation. But Damon took it with a short nod and walked away, which was probably the best available outcome. Rowan turned back to the conference room window. He was thinking about Malcolm Vane. He hadn't spoken to Malcolm directly yet, which was intentional. Malcolm was the kind of man who became careful when he felt watched, and Rowan didn't want to make him careful yet. He wanted Malcolm to believe that the new trial member was a useful idiot somebody Adeline had brought in for appearances, someone who'd be gone in 7 days. The longer Malcolm underestimated him, the more he would continue operating normally, and normal operation left patterns. So Rowan watched. He cataloged Malcolm's movements the way he'd once cataloged coastlines and entry points and the rhythms of buildings that needed to be understood before anything could happen inside them. Malcolm arrived at 7:40 every morning. He took his lunch at 12:15, always at his desk, always with the door closed. He walked the building at 3 in the afternoon, a security check that was part of his established routine. He left by 6:30. What wasn't part of his established routine was the way he stopped, twice in 2 days, near the building's internal server room on the east corridor. Not long enough to be suspicious to a casual observer. Long enough for Rowan to notice. The server room housed Northstar's internal communications infrastructure, including the scheduling and logistics systems. Rowan put that next to what he already had, and didn't like the picture that was forming. On the third morning, the picture got worse. He'd rerouted Adeline's convoy again, a minor variation on the previous day's route, just enough of a shift to test whether the timing of anything in the building's environment changed accordingly. He was watching for correlation. If someone inside Northstar was feeding external parties information about her movements, there would be a small window between the schedule update and any observable response from the outside. He saw the response before he was looking for it. They were 4 blocks from the building, Adeline's vehicle in the middle of a 3-car convoy, when the intersection ahead sealed itself not with a traffic light malfunction, but with the particular efficiency of an engineered block. A delivery truck had stalled across the 2 center lanes. A city maintenance vehicle had pulled up behind it, ostensibly responding. And a third vehicle, a dark panel van, had positioned itself at the intersection's northwest corner in a way that would have channeled the convoy into a single-lane crawl between 2 fixed points. Rowan saw it in 4 seconds. "Turn left," he said to the driver. "Now. Don't slow down. Don't signal. Just turn." The driver, a young man named Torres, who was new enough to the detail that he still defaulted to instructions from whoever sounded most certain, turned left without hesitating. They were past the intersection and 3 blocks away before anyone in the other convoy vehicles understood what had happened. Rowan got on the radio. "Convoy route change. East corridor to secondary approach. Do not use Meridian." He switched channels. "This is Striker. I need someone to run plates on a dark panel van, northwest corner of Meridian and 5th. Do it quietly. Don't approach the vehicle." He heard Damon's voice on the radio a beat later, controlled but tight. "What did you see?" "A channeling setup," Rowan said. "Textbook." Someone knew the route. Silence for 3 seconds. "We changed the route this morning," Damon said. "Yes," Rowan said. We did. Another silence. This one longer, with a different weight to it. In the back seat, Adeline had been on her phone, reading something. She lowered it now and looked at Rowan in the front passenger seat. She'd heard the radio exchange. She was very still. "Someone in this building," she said. "Someone with access to the scheduling update from this morning," Rowan confirmed, which was distributed to 7 people. She absorbed that. She didn't panic, he'd noticed she didn't do that, but something behind her composed expression tightened visibly. "You think it's Malcolm. I think it's worth looking harder at him." She was quiet for the rest of the drive. They reached the building through the secondary approach. Once Adeline was inside and settled, Rowan slipped down to the motor pool on the building's sublevel and crouched beside the passenger side of her primary vehicle. He found it in 90 seconds. It was tucked up inside the rear wheel, well small, matte black, no larger than a deck of cards. A GPS transmitter, professionally installed, positioned to survive the vibration of daily driving, and positioned at an angle that made visual detection nearly impossible, unless you were specifically looking for it and you knew where to look. He didn't touch it. He took 3 photographs with his phone, then stood up and stood still for a moment in the cold fluorescent light of the motor pool, because what he was holding in his head now wasn't a suspicion or a pattern anymore. This was active, ongoing surveillance of Adeline Marwick's vehicle. And the installation was professional, not the work of someone who'd bought a consumer tracker online. This was the kind of placement that required knowledge, practice, and authorized access to the vehicle pool. He went back upstairs and found Adeline in her office. He closed the door behind him, which he hadn't done before. She looked up from her desk immediately. She'd seen enough in his expression to know this wasn't a routine check-in. "Show me," she said, before he could speak. He showed her the photographs. She looked at them for a long time. Her face didn't change much, but both hands were flat on the desk in front of her, very still, and Rowan recognized that kind of stillness. It was the stillness of someone managing something internally that they weren't going to show you. "How long has it been there?" she asked. "I can't say exactly without running the data. But it's not new. The housing has road grime on it." She nodded. "We need to leave it in place," Rowan said. She looked up. "You want to leave it. If we remove it, whoever installed it knows we found it. Right now, they think they still have your position. That's useful." He paused. "I can feed false route data through the system. Make them think you're somewhere you're not. It gives us a window to watch who reacts." Adeline looked at him steadily. "And if something goes wrong during that window, I'll be with you," he said. It was a plain statement of fact, not a reassurance. Reassurances were usually empty. He'd heard enough of them in his life to know they were what people said when they didn't have anything better to offer. He wasn't offering her comfort. He was telling her that the operational plan included his physical presence as a constant, which was different. She held his eyes for a moment. Then, all right. He had Torres cross-reference the GPS transmitter data with Northstar's motor pool access logs who had checked out, accessed, or been authorized near Adeline's vehicle in the past 3 months. The list was manageable. Malcolm's name wasn't on it directly, but a subordinate of his, a junior security coordinator named Feld, had logged 3 separate motor pool access entries in a 2-week window where no operational reason was recorded. Feld reported directly to Malcolm. Rowan added that to the notebook. 2 days later, the fundraiser. It was a private event, a quarterly stakeholder dinner, held at the Northstar Executive Hospitality Suite on the building's top floor, attended by roughly 60 people, including major investors, board members, and several government contractors whose relationship with Northstar was, according to Priya's event brief, ongoing and significant. Rowan had read the guest list 3 times. He'd also walked the venue floor twice before anyone arrived and had noted 3 things. The primary evacuation route ran through a narrow corridor on the building's west side that funneled directly onto a single stairwell. The backup emergency exit on the east side had a manual release that required 12 seconds to activate and was partially blocked by a caterer's equipment staging area. And the building's fire system for this floor was older than the rest of the infrastructure and had never been integrated with the updated management panel. He told Damon all of this. Damon acknowledged it, made a note, and moved one of the caterer's equipment carts. That was the extent of what got fixed. Rowan positioned himself near Adeline for the first hour of the event, which was the cocktail period champagne and cautious conversation, and the particular energy of a room full of people, all trying to determine how much everyone else knew about the company's financial situation without asking directly. He wasn't very good at cocktail events socially, But he was very good at watching rooms during them, because cocktail conversations required people to look at each other, which meant nobody was looking at him, which meant he could watch everything. He noticed the journalist at 40 minutes in. The man had press credentials. They were hanging around his neck on the standard Northstar lanyard, which meant he'd been cleared by media relations, and his identification had passed the gate verification. He was doing what journalists did at these events, standing at the periphery, making occasional notes, occasionally lifting his phone to take photographs of the room. Except his angles were wrong. His photographs weren't of the room. They were of Adeline, specifically of Adeline in conversation with a man named Gerhard Steele, who was a private investor with European holdings, and whose presence on the guest list Rowan had noted and then set aside as unremarkable. Rowan crossed the room in a way that didn't look like crossing. He moved along the outer wall, paused near a waiter station, picked up a glass he had no intention of drinking from, and positioned himself 4 feet behind the journalist, close enough to read the credentials clearly. The credentials were Northstar Media Division issue. Authentic formatting, authentic lanyard, authentic photo ID lamination. But the name on them, David Farrell, contracted press didn't match the face, because Rowan had an extremely good memory for faces, and for a reason he couldn't immediately articulate. This face triggered a pattern recognition he couldn't quite place. Not a known face, a category of face. The particular category of professional who'd been trained to look unremarkable, which was itself a kind of training. He reached out and took the man's elbow, gently, the way one colleague steers another toward the bar. "Walk with me," Rowan said quietly. The man went still for half a second, just half, but Rowan felt it through the elbow. Then he walked. They found a quiet service alcove near the kitchen corridor. Rowan released his arm and positioned himself between the man and the main room. The man looked at him with the careful, neutral expression of someone deciding which version of events to lead with. "David Farrell," Rowan said. "Media division. That's right. What are you shooting for?" "Quarterly stakeholder coverage." From that angle. Rowan looked at him flatly. "You were shooting Adeline Marwick's face in every photo. Not the room. Not the event. Her face at the exact moment she was standing next to Gerhard Steele." The man said nothing. "The credentials are real," Rowan said, "which means someone with access to media division resources authorized them. Your face is not in the system. I'd have seen it on the approved press list, and I read that list this afternoon." He paused. "So either you're using borrowed credentials or someone made them for you specifically. Either way, you didn't come here to cover a fundraiser." A long pause. The kitchen sounds were loud beyond the door. Voices, clatter, someone shouting about a warming tray. "I was paid to photograph her," the man said finally. His voice was flat, professional, the voice of someone who'd decided that honesty was the fastest available exit. Specifically to document her in private conversation with Steele. Get it to look intimate if possible. Like they knew each other better than a CEO and investor should. Paid by who? I don't know. Drop account. Wire transfer. What happens to the photographs? I deliver them. I don't know what happens after. Rowan looked at him for a moment. "You're going to stay in this alcove until I tell you to move. You're going to give me your phone and your camera. And you're going to write down everything you know about the transaction, every detail, every method, every message. And then I'm going to decide what happens next." The man handed over the equipment without argument, which told Rowan that he'd already decided the job wasn't worth a confrontation. Rowan handed the phone and camera to Torres, who'd appeared at his shoulder. He'd texted him from the elbow walk, and then stood alone for a moment in the alcove. He thought about what the photographer had said. Document her in private conversation with a foreign investor. Make it look intimate. Not kill her. Not threaten the building. Photograph her. He went back to everything he'd assembled in the past 4 days: the GPS tracker, the traffic channeling setup, the compromised scheduling access, and now a stitched photography operation, designed to make Adeline look like she was conducting improper private meetings with foreign capital. The pieces rearranged themselves. This wasn't a protection problem. This wasn't someone trying to get to Adeline physically. This was a credibility operation. Whoever was behind this wanted photographs, wanted manufactured evidence, wanted to build a story that could be handed to Northstar's board, the CEO conducting secret financial meetings with foreign investors, the CEO whose judgment was compromised, the CEO who needed to be removed for the company's protection. He needed to find Adeline. He moved back toward the main room and was 3 steps through the door when the fire alarm went off. The sound was immediate and total, the sustained electronic scream of a building-wide alert, and the effect on a room of 60 people was instant. Conversations died mid-sentence. Heads turned. Then bodies began moving, with the particular collective momentum of a crowd that has decided that moving is the correct response without having determined where to move to. A Northstar events coordinator was already at the main room entrance, directing people toward the primary evacuation corridor, the west side hallway that funneled to the single stairwell, the one Rowan had walked twice before the event. He stood still while everyone else moved. He looked toward the west corridor. He looked at the rate of flow, 60 people compressing into a narrow space, moving fast, moving without individual decision-making, guided by the coordinator and by instinct and by the alarm still screaming overhead. He thought about the traffic channeling setup. The delivery truck and the maintenance vehicle and the dark panel van, positioned to compress a convoy into a single lane between two fixed points. He looked at the 60 people moving into the west corridor. Same structure, different scale. Adeline. He found her in 3 seconds. She was moving with the crowd, which was the natural thing to do. He put a hand on her arm. She turned startled. "Come with me," he said. The alarm, "Come with me now." She heard something in his voice. She came. He pulled her left, away from the crowd, toward the east side backup exit, the one with the 12-second manual release and the caterer's equipment staged in front of it. Damon had moved one cart. There were still 2 others. Rowan hit the first cart with his shoulder, shoved it sideways hard enough that it scraped across the floor and cleared the door. He got his hands on the release bar and put his full weight into it. The mechanism was stiff, corroded in its housing, and it took closer to 15 seconds than 12 before the door gave with a metallic complaint and opened onto the external stairwell. Cold air, night sky. The sound of the fire alarm muffled by the door swinging shut behind them. Adeline looked at him. They were on the external landing. The city spread out below them, stairs leading down to street level. "The alarm is a setup," he said. She stared at him. "You don't know that. The west corridor is a bottleneck. 1 stairwell, 60 people, a narrow hallway. It's the same architecture as the traffic block, compress movement into a single predictable path and control what happens inside it." He looked at her steadily. "I'm not certain, but I'm not wrong." She held his for a long moment. Then she looked away at the staircase below them. They went down. They reached the street on the building's east side, just as the first responders were arriving on the west side fire units, which meant whoever had triggered the alarm had called it in as a real fire, which meant it had been filed with enough supporting detail to generate a genuine dispatch. Rowan got Adeline into Torres's vehicle, which he'd texted for before they hit the stairwell. He kept himself between her and the street until the door closed. Inside the vehicle, moving away from the building, Adeline sat back in the seat and looked at the ceiling for a moment in the way of someone who is not quite processing the thing they just escaped, because processing it would require acknowledging it, and acknowledging it would mean something specific about the nature of what was happening to her. "A corporate coup," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. She'd already gotten there herself. "They're not trying to hurt me. They're trying to remove me." "Yes," Rowan said. And the photographs from tonight, if the photographer had delivered them, would have been the next piece. She was quiet. "The board," she said. "Conrad." She said the name the way people say the names of things they've been afraid of for a long time, flatly, without inflection, because all the emotion that name carried had been lived with for long enough to be compressed into something smaller and harder. "Conrad Marwick," Rowan said. "Your uncle. He's been on the board for 15 years, she said. "He was furious when my father named me instead of him. He's been patient about it." She paused. "I didn't think he'd be this patient." "Patience is expensive," Rowan said. "This operation has resources. The tracking hardware, the fake press credentials, the traffic setup, none of that is cheap or simple. Someone has been planning this for a long time, and they've been paying for it." Adeline looked at him. In the moving vehicle, in the city light coming through the window, she looked tired in a way she hadn't let herself look inside the building, the kind of tired that accumulates when you've been holding yourself together in front of an audience for too long, and suddenly the audience is gone. "Malcolm?" she asked. "Malcolm is the mechanism," Rowan said. "But the money and the motive are Conrad's." She absorbed that. "The drone program unveiling," she said. "It's in 6 days." "I know. Billions of dollars, Rowan. Contracts with 3 government agencies. It cannot be canceled or postponed. If I pull back now, Conrad will use the hesitation against me, tell the board I'm losing control of the division, losing my nerve." She shook her head. "We go forward." He looked at her. He understood operationally, strategically, she was correct. Retreating was losing. But 6 days was not much runway given the level of coordination on the other side. Then we have 6 days to find out who's funding Malcolm, he said. She nodded. The vehicle moved through the city. The fire alarm was far behind them now. Rowan kept his eyes on the traffic and thought about the next 6 days and what they had to build in that time. And somewhere underneath the operational calculus, there was something else, a quiet, particular awareness of the woman sitting 2 feet from him, holding herself with a composure that cost more than she was letting on, in a car she hadn't expected to be in tonight, heading somewhere she hadn't planned to go. He didn't say anything about that. He filed it away with everything else and kept watching the road. The photographs ran in the financial press at 6:47 the following morning. Rowan saw them on his phone before he'd finished his first coffee, standing in his kitchen in the gray pre-dawn light while Cassidy's cat wound around his ankles looking for breakfast. The images were crisp, professionally shot, time-stamped to the previous evening. Adeline Marwick in close conversation with Gerhard Steele, her expression attentive, her body language compressed by the camera angle into something that read as intimacy rather than professional courtesy. The headline above them used the word secret. The subheading used the phrase undisclosed foreign investment discussions. Neither was accurate. Both were designed to be believed. Rowan put the phone face down on the counter and fed the cat, because the cat didn't care about financial press or manufactured scandals and demanded breakfast with the uncomplicated urgency of a creature operating entirely outside human politics. He found that briefly clarifying. Then he picked the phone back up and called Torres. "How many outlets?" he said without preamble. "4 so far," Torres said. He sounded like he hadn't slept. 2 financial publications, 1 general news site, 1 business wire service. The images are identical across all of them, same source, distributed simultaneously, which means someone held them ready and released them on a schedule, Rowan said. "Yes. Have you told Adeline?" "I was waiting for you." Rowan looked at the time, 6:52. "Don't wait for me," he said. "She needs to know before she sees it on her own, and she's probably already seen it." She had. He found out when he arrived at Northstar 40 minutes later and was met in the lobby by her assistant, a competent woman named Bess, who had the controlled expression of someone managing multiple simultaneous crises and would appreciate it if everyone could confine themselves to one at a time. "She's on a call with the board's communications liaison," Bess said, walking beside him toward the elevator. "She's been on it since 6:30. "Who called who?" "The liaison called her." "Conrad's camp," Rowan said. Bess didn't confirm it, which was itself a confirmation. He waited outside her office for 12 minutes. When Adeline opened the door, she looked like someone who'd gotten dressed carefully in response to a situation that made her want to be very undone, every element of her appearance precisely assembled, which was how he'd learned to read the difference between her composed days and her difficult ones. On the composed days, she carried herself with a certain ease. On the difficult ones, the precision got sharper, and the ease disappeared. "Come in," she said. He came in. She closed the door. "Conrad has called for an emergency board session," she said. She moved behind her desk and stood rather than sitting, which she did when she needed to think on her feet, literally. "He's framing the photographs as evidence of undisclosed foreign financial negotiations, conducted without board knowledge or approval. He's requesting a formal review of my fitness to continue as CEO pending investigation. How many board members is he likely to pull? 4, maybe 5. He needs 6 for a suspension motion. He might get there." She looked at the window. "He's had those photographs since last night. He waited until they were in the press first, so the board would see them publicly before I could provide context privately." "Sequence matters," Rowan said. "You see the accusation before you hear the defense, the accusation sticks." "Yes." She turned back from the window. "Gerhard Steele is a legitimate investor. He attended a legitimate event. We've had 3 formal meetings logged with legal, and the board already knows about his fund's interest in the drone program. None of this is secret." Her voice stayed level, but something underneath it had an edge, not anger, exactly. More like the particular frustration of someone who's been operating in perfect compliance and still finds themselves defending it. "The photographs are out of context and the framing is deliberate, but context takes time to establish, and Conrad is moving faster than I can respond." "Then we need to move faster than Conrad," Rowan said. She looked at him. "How we get ahead of the financial story ourselves. Your communications team puts out a full statement today, not a denial, a timeline. Every meeting with Steele, every board notification, every filing. Make the transparency so complete that the secret meeting narrative collapses against the documented record. He paused. And we accelerate finding what connects Conrad to Malcolm. If we can put those two together before the board session, Conrad's motion becomes evidence of his own conspiracy rather than legitimate concern about yours. Adeline sat down finally, which was either a good sign or a sign that her legs were tired. We have 5 days before the drone program unveiling, she said. The board session Conrad's requesting will be before that, probably in 2 days, maybe 3. He'll want to move before the program launches because a successful launch makes my position unassailable. So we have 48 hours at the outside, Rowan said. 48 hours, she confirmed. He left her to the communications team and went to find a quiet corner with his notebook and his phone and the particular focused stillness that settled over him when a timeline compressed. It wasn't calm exactly. It was more like the noise inside his head getting very organized, the way a river gets focused when the channel narrows. He spent the next 3 hours pulling financial threads. He had Torres running the photographer's phone data, the drop account information, the message logs, anything that could be forensically extracted and traced. He had Damon, who'd become grudgingly cooperative since the fire alarm incident, and whose territorial instincts had been partially redirected toward Malcolm now that he'd started to understand the shape of what was happening, running internal access logs for every system Malcolm had touched in the past 60 days. And he was doing his own work, going back through the operational details of the last week and looking at them differently. Not as security incidents, as communications. Someone had coordinated the traffic block, the photographer, the fire alarm, and the press release. Not sequentially, but simultaneously, these weren't improvised responses to circumstances. They were a planned sequence executed across multiple actors. That level of coordination required a central communication point, not encrypted messaging apps, which left logs that could be found. Something older. Something with fewer digital footprints. He was still working through that when his phone buzzed with a text from a number he didn't recognize. Your daughter walks past the East Campus fountain every Tuesday and Thursday at 3:15. He read it twice. Then he sat very still for approximately 4 seconds, which was the amount of time it took for the operational part of his brain to catch up with the part that had just gone ice cold at the mention of Cassidy. He called her immediately. 3 rings. 4. His jaw tightened by a millimeter for each ring. She picked up on the 5th. Dad, I'm literally in a study group. Are you on campus? A pause. Yes, I'm in the library. Let's stay there. Do not go to the East Fountain. Stay in a public indoor space. Stay with other people. And call me if anyone approaches you that you don't know. He kept his voice flat and even, which cost something. I'll explain later, Rowan. She used his first name when she was being serious, which she'd started doing 2 years ago and he still wasn't entirely used to. What's happening? Someone sent me a message about your routine. I don't know yet what it means, but I'm not treating it as casual. He paused. I need you to trust me on this. A beat of silence. Okay, she said. Not happy about it, but okay, good. He exhaled. I'll call you in an hour. He hung up and looked at the unknown number. He already knew it was a dead-end burner phone or a routed number, something that would trace back to nothing, but he texted Torres the number anyway, because dead ends occasionally had edges worth examining. Then he sat with it. This was the move he'd been expecting, without knowing he'd been expecting it. Every protection operation he'd ever worked, and he'd worked more than most, in circumstances that made Northstar look like a corporate policy dispute, had the same structural vulnerability. The protector cares about someone. The protector's caring about someone creates a lever. If you can find the lever and apply enough pressure, the protector removes himself. The text wasn't a threat to Cassidy directly. It was a demonstration. They know where she is. They know her routine. They know she's the lever. And the message was timed for this exact window when he was 48 hours from a board confrontation, when Adeline was most exposed, when his removal would cause the most damage to whatever they'd built in the last week. He thought about Elias. He tried not to think about Elias when he was working, the way you try not to touch a bruise while you're trying to function, but it surfaced now with the particular involuntary timing of things that have been pressed down for too long. Elias Mercer, who had been the fastest operator he'd ever worked with, and the worst cook, and the most consistently wrong about women, and the closest thing to a brother that Rowan's adult life had produced, who had died in a corridor in a building that the team had been told was clear, on an operation whose route had been leaked before they arrived, while Rowan was positioned exactly where he'd been ordered to be, and someone had later decided that his positioning was abandonment. The disgrace had taken 6 months to fully land. The military investigation, the sealed record, the quiet end of everything he'd built. He'd had Cassidy to keep him moving, 8 years old then, and already far more perceptive than any 8-year-old should need to be. Already understanding that her father was holding something that was slowly crushing him and offering him the only thing she had, which was her company and her completely unreasonable cheerfulness in the face of his worst days. He had built his post-Navy life around 2 principles: protect everyone within reach, and keep the people you love at enough distance that they can't be used against you. Those 2 principles were, he understood, in direct and unresolvable conflict. You could not fully commit to protecting someone and also keep yourself detached enough to walk away cleanly when the walking away became necessary. He hadn't worked out a solution to that conflict. He'd just lived inside it for 11 years. He stood up. He needed to talk to Adeline. He found her coming out of a meeting with her communications director. The statement was drafted, the timeline compiled, the documentation ready for distribution. She looked at him once and steered them both toward the window alcove at the end of the corridor, away from the foot traffic. "What happened?" she said. He showed her the text. She read it. Her face went very still in the way it did when she was processing something she didn't want to show a reaction to. Then she looked up at him. "They're targeting Cassidy," she said. "They're targeting me through Cassidy," he said. "There's a difference. She's not in direct danger, not yet. This is a pressure move. They want me to remove myself from your detail at the worst possible moment." Adeline held his eyes, then "Remove yourself." He blinked. "Adeline, Rowan." Her voice was even, but there was something underneath it that wasn't. "She's your daughter. If you're here because leaving would put her at risk." "I'm here because leaving would put you at risk," he said. "And I know that's what they're counting on." She was quiet for a moment. "That's not a reason to stay. That's a reason to be angry about being manipulated. There's a difference." "Both can be true," he said. She looked at him for a long time. There was something complicated in her expression, not quite concern. Something more personal than that, which she clearly had no intention of naming, and which he had no intention of pushing her on, because some things stay in the place where they are until the operational situation resolves itself, and you have the luxury of looking at them directly. "What do you need?" she said finally. "I need someone watching Cassidy today. Not heavy, someone visible enough that she feels covered, not visible enough that it escalates whatever this is." He paused. "Damon." Adeline's eyebrows moved slightly. "You trust Damon with your daughter?" "I trust Damon to do what he's told once he understands what he's protecting," Rowan said. "And I think he's figured out enough of this situation that he's motivated." He paused. "He's not dirty, Adeline. He's just been used by someone who's smarter than him, and he's starting to figure that out, and that makes him useful." She nodded slowly. "I'll arrange it." He called Damon himself, because some conversations needed to happen person to person. Damon picked up on the second ring, and Rowan explained the situation with minimal framing. Cassidy, the text, what he needed, why. There was a short pause on the other end. "Your daughter," Damon said. "Yes." Another pause. "Send me your picture and the campus layout." That was all he said. Rowan sent the information and trusted that Damon's better instincts had finally found the context they needed to operate. He went back to his financial threads. He'd been working through a particular question: how Conrad communicated with Malcolm in a way that left no digital record, and the answer had been somewhere at the back of his thinking all morning, nudging against the edges of other thoughts. It surfaced cleanly now, the way things sometimes did when you stopped pushing at them directly. Northstar had a legacy internal mail system. Pre-digital. Physical memos, routing slips, internal correspondence, physically delivered by administrative couriers within the building. The systems had never been decommissioned because several senior division heads, older ones, long tenured, preferred it for certain categories of internal communication that they considered sensitive. It was essentially invisible to digital audits because it had no digital component. It was also, he realized, the exact kind of system that a man like Conrad, who had been on the Northstar board for 15 years and who understood its administrative infrastructure better than most, would know existed and would know how to use. He found Nora Wexley. Nora was Northstar's operations chief, a compact, efficient woman in her late 40s who had the organizational mind of someone who'd been making large systems function correctly for most of her professional life and had very little patience for people who broke them. She'd been courteous to Rowan throughout the week in the precise, professional way of someone who was reserving final judgment until she had more information. He went to her office, closed the door, and laid out what he had: the tracker, the route compromise, the photographer, the fire alarm, the text message about Cassidy, and his theory about the legacy mail system. He told her about Malcolm and about Conrad and about what he believed the board motion was actually designed to accomplish. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. The legacy mail routing logs, she said. Physical routing slips. If someone's been using the system to communicate between an executive suite and the security division without digital trace. The routing slips are filed, she said. Physical archives, third floor records room. 30 days retention. She looked at him. If you're right about the timing, the relevant communications would still be there. Can you get them? I'm operations chief, she said. I can get anything in this building. She paused. If I'm pulling archive records, I want to know what I'm looking for. Internal routing between Conrad Marwick's office and Malcolm Vane's division, Rowan said. Anything in the past 60 days, she held his eyes. You understand that if you're wrong about this, you've implicated 2 senior Northstar figures in a criminal conspiracy based on archive filing patterns. I'm not wrong, he said. She looked at him for another moment, with a particular expression of someone deciding whether the person in front of them is reckless or simply certain, and whether either of those things is reassuring. Then she stood up. Give me 2 hours. He went back to Adeline. The afternoon moved the way hours move when you have too many variables, and not enough information yet slowly in some places, too fast in others, with a particular elasticity that comes from running multiple concerns simultaneously. He stayed close to Adeline through 2 internal meetings and a call with her legal team about the board communications strategy, and he kept one eye on the phone for updates from Torres about the photographer's device data and from Damon about Cassidy. Damon checked in at 2:15 on campus. She's in the library. She knows I'm here. She wanted me to tell you she's filing a formal complaint about hovering. Rowan read that and felt something loosen slightly in his chest. At 3:40, Torres called. The burner number, Torres said. Dead end on the phone itself. But I pulled the metadata from the text message transmission, and there's a tower ping that puts the device in a 2-block radius of the Northstar building at the time of transmission. Inside the building, Rowan said. Or very close to it. Malcolm. The building. The timing mid-morning, when Malcolm would have been at his desk or walking his 3 o'clock floor check. Rowan added that to the growing structure of what he had and went to find Nora. She was in her office with a manila folder on her desk. She'd found something he could tell from the specific quality of her stillness, which was different from her usual operational efficiency. This was the stillness of someone who'd found more than they expected. 31 routing slips, she said, opening the folder, over the past 51 days. Internal correspondence from Conrad Marwick's personal administrative account to Malcolm Vane's division office. All marked internal confidential, all filed in standard administrative sequence, none of them flagged because the volume isn't unusual for a board member conducting extended liaison with the security division. She laid 3 of them on the desk. Rowan looked at them. They were handwritten, Conrad's handwriting, he assumed, though he'd need confirmation, and they used operational language, the kind that would look like routine security coordination to anyone not looking for something specific. Route assessments, personnel evaluations, protocol updates. But the dates corresponded exactly. The routing slip 3 days before the traffic channeling incident. The routing slip 2 days before the fire alarm. The routing slip 1 day before the press photographs were distributed. He had the communication chain. He had the coordination record. He still needed the financial link, the money that had funded the photographer, the GPS hardware, the external operatives. That was the piece that turned a paper trail into an indictment. But what he had now was enough to take to Adeline and enough to shift the board's calculus if it could be presented correctly. He picked up his phone to call her. It rang before he could dial. Unknown number, he answered. It was a man's voice, flat and professional. In the way of someone conveying information rather than conducting a conversation, Adeline Marwick has been removed from Northstar headquarters. She is currently being transported to Northstar's private airfield under security order PV-117. Transport has been authorized under her own digital credentials. The call ended. Rowan was already moving before his hand came down from his ear. He went through the executive floor. In 20 seconds, her office empty, Bess's desk empty, the corridor quiet with the particular vacancy of a space that had recently been occupied and abruptly wasn't. He checked the security feed on his phone, the system Torres had given him access to, and found the east parking structure camera showing a 3-vehicle convoy that had departed 6 minutes ago. 6 minutes. She'd been taken 6 minutes ago while he was in Nora's office looking at routing slips. While he'd been 30 feet away and looking in a slightly wrong direction. He hit Damon's number. Damon picked up in one ring. I just saw it on the building feed. Malcolm's people. They had a security order. The order is forged, Rowan said. Her digital credentials were compromised, same access point as the scheduling system. They generated the order from inside. He was at the elevator. The private airfield. Get there. I'm leaving now, Damon said. Cassidy, she stays on campus. Don't leave her alone. Get someone from Torres' team to cover. I need you at the airfield. A beat. Then, I'll be there. Rowan hit the lobby at a run, which he hadn't done inside a building since a night in a country he didn't talk about, in a corridor that still sometimes appeared in the thin part of sleep when the night was very quiet. He didn't think about that. He got to the car. The airfield was 14 minutes away with traffic, 8 without. He drove the route that Torres had mapped 2 days ago for exactly this category of emergency alternate corridors, traffic signal patterns, the particular geometry of the city between Northstar and the airfield boundary. He made it in 9 minutes. Not 8. Not because he drove badly, but because a city is not a controlled environment, and controlled environments don't exist outside of plans. He hit the airfield perimeter and assessed from the vehicle before exiting. 1 aircraft on the tarmac, a mid-sized private jet, engines on, access stairs extended. 3 vehicles near the terminal, all Northstar security issue. 4 guards visible, potentially more inside. 1 figure being guided across the tarmac by 2 men, Adeline, moving without resistance but with the rigid posture of someone who has made a deliberate calculation about when resistance is useful and determined that this was not yet that moment. Rowan looked at the airfield layout, at the guard positions, at the stairway up to the aircraft, and at the service vehicle access point on the south perimeter that was covered by only 1 camera and currently unoccupied. Then he called Nora. I need you to ground that aircraft, he said without preamble. Whatever authority you have as operations chief, use it. File a maintenance hold, a fuel compliance flag, a routing issue, anything. Ground it now and lock the tarmac access remotely. A 2-second pause. Rowan, right now, Nora. He heard keys, a brief exchange with someone in her office, and then done. 2-minute processing delay before the system pushes to airfield operations. 2 minutes. He got out of the car. He went through the south perimeter access point at a pace that was neither running nor casual, the deliberate, purposeful movement of someone who belongs where they are and has somewhere specific to be. The single guard at that checkpoint was facing the wrong direction toward the tarmac, toward the aircraft, toward the action which was the guard's natural instinct and also his operational failure. Rowan was past him before he turned. The terminal building was a single-story structure waiting area, security office, 2 restrooms, and a service corridor running along the back that connected to the tarmac access door. He went through the service corridor. He came out through the tarmac access door at the far end of the aircraft's parking position, 30 feet from the access stairs. And he saw Malcolm. Malcolm Vane, Northstar's 11-year security director, was standing at the base of the aircraft stairs in a dark overcoat, holding a phone, watching the 2 guards escort Adeline toward the steps, with the expression of a man overseeing a logistics operation that is proceeding on schedule. He was 53, silver-haired, with the particular self-possession of someone who has spent years being trusted and has made long, careful calculations about how to convert that trust into something more useful. He hadn't seen Rowan yet. Adeline had. Her eyes found him across the 30 feet of tarmac with the specific quality of someone who has been waiting for something without knowing they were waiting for it. She didn't change her pace, didn't react visibly, because she understood immediately that visible reaction would alert the 2 men holding her arms. Rowan looked at her. He gave her nothing, no signal, no communication, because the operational moment required patience for stillness and patience for 4 more seconds, while Damon arrived at the terminal's north entrance, which Rowan had texted him to use, while moving through the service corridor. He heard the north entrance open. He moved. He didn't move toward Malcolm. He moved toward the 2 guards holding Adeline between them, specifically, leveraging the same geometry he'd used on the training mat a week ago, but with the different urgency of a situation with actual stakes. It wasn't clean. The first guard reacted faster than Damon would have, and Rowan took an elbow to the jaw that made his vision jump for a half second before he completed the motion, and the man went down. The second released Adeline and turned toward Rowan, and then Damon was there, arriving from the north end of the tarmac at a run, and the second guard made a rapid decision about his options and chose the ground voluntarily. Malcolm hadn't moved. He was looking at Rowan with an expression that had passed through surprise and arrived at something colder. The phone was still in his hand. "The aircraft is grounded," Rowan said. He was breathing harder than he wanted to be, and his jaw was going to be interesting tomorrow. "Tarmac access is locked. You have nowhere to go." Malcolm looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the aircraft. Then he looked back at Rowan. "You have no idea," Malcolm said, "what you've walked into." "Tell me," Rowan said. Malcolm was quiet. Then slowly, the calculation in his expression shifted the shifting of a man who's run out of operational options and is deciding what to trade. "Conrad promised me control of the Global Security Division," he said. "Once she was out. Full autonomy, budget authority, international scope." He said it without shame, which was almost more disturbing than if he'd been defensive about it. 11 years of running security for this company and watching the board restructure around me every time ownership shifted. I was owed. Elias Mercer was owed more, Rowan said. The name landed. He watched it land. He watched Malcolm's face do something very specific, not guilt, not exactly, but the tightening of someone who has heard a name they buried a long time ago and didn't expect to hear said out loud today. "Not here, not by this man. You were there," Rowan said. It wasn't a question. It had been sitting at the back of his mind since he'd first run Malcolm's name against the security files, a pattern too old to fully form until this moment. 11 years ago, the operation where Elias died. You were connected to it. Malcolm's jaw tightened. "The route leak," Rowan said. "Someone with security clearance fed our approach route to the wrong people. Elias died in a corridor that was supposed to be clear, and I was held responsible for a position I was ordered to take." His voice stayed even. It cost him to keep it even, but it stayed there. What happened next was something Rowan hadn't expected, though later he would understand that he should have. Malcolm didn't deny it. He said, "You were never supposed to come back into any of this." And somewhere behind Rowan's left shoulder, a device that Nora had been running from her office since the moment he'd called her, and which was recording on a timestamp that would later be verified by federal investigators, captured every word. The tarmac was cold. Rowan noticed that in the particular way you notice physical details when adrenaline is receding, and the body starts filing basic reports again: the temperature, the wind coming off the runway, the smell of jet fuel and damp concrete, the low throb of the grounded aircraft's engines cycling down behind them. His jaw was registering the elbow it had caught. Not broken. He'd had broken before, and this wasn't it, but it was going to swell, and Cassidy was going to have opinions about it. Malcolm stood at the base of the aircraft stairs, with two of Damon's hands on his shoulders, and the particular stillness of a man who has exhausted his operational options, and is now performing a very different kind of calculation than one about. What happens next? Who talks first, and what can still be traded? Adeline stood 6 feet away. She hadn't spoken since Rowan reached her. She was watching Malcolm with an expression that wasn't anger, exactly, and wasn't satisfaction, either. It was closer to the expression of someone who has spent a long time suspecting that the ground beneath them was hollow and has just heard it collapse and is standing at the edge of the hole looking down into it. Damon looked at Rowan. "Police? Not yet," Rowan said. "Get him into the terminal. Off the tarmac." He looked at the two guards who'd been escorting Adeline, both on the ground, neither seriously hurt, both looking at the situation with the particular expression of men who have just realized they've been on the wrong side of something and are reevaluating their professional choices. Those two as well. They moved everyone into the terminal's small security office, a room with a metal desk, 4 chairs, a wall-mounted monitor showing the tarmac feed, and a coffee machine that had been allowed to run dry. Rowan stood near the door. Damon kept Malcolm in a chair by the desk. Adeline stayed near the window, her arms crossed, watching. The two guards Rowan had gotten their names from their ID clips. Harmon and Weeks sat against the far wall. They'd surrendered their phones without being asked, which was their way of communicating that they understood the situation had changed, and they were interested in minimizing their personal exposure. Rowan looked at Malcolm. Malcolm looked back at him with the controlled expression of a man who has decided that saying very little is currently his best asset. He'd been quiet since the tarmac. The one thing he'd said, "You were never supposed to come back into any of this," had been said to the open air, to Rowan, to the sequence of events that had brought them both to this specific cold airfield. It hadn't been said to a recording device, but that was no longer his to control. Noor's recording was clean, Rowan said. It wasn't a question. It was information he was providing to Malcolm, so Malcolm could do his own math. Something moved through Malcolm's expression. A small recalibration. How long have you had a feed running? From the moment I called her to ground the aircraft, Rowan said. She activated it herself. She's operations chief. She has that authority. He paused. You said Conrad promised you the global security division. You said you were owed. You said I was never supposed to come back into any of this. He paused. That's the operation 11 years ago. On the record. Malcolm was quiet for a moment. Then, a recording made without consent during a stressful confrontation on a private airfield is not automatically admissible. That's true, Rowan said. It also doesn't need to be the only evidence. He pulled out his notebook, the one he'd been filling since day one of the trial, small cramped handwriting and mechanical pencil. GPS tracking device installed in the CEO's primary vehicle by a member of your division during 3 unauthorized motor pool access visits. Routing slips physical dated in your handwriting, and Conrad's coordinating your movements with his board strategy across 51 days. A burner text sent from a device that pinged within 2 blocks of this building during a period when your access log shows you in the East Corridor. A fake press credential authorized through a media division contact that traces back to a supplier your division uses for legitimate credential production. He closed the notebook. The recording doesn't have to be admissible. It just has to be true. And it is. And the rest of this is documented. Malcolm looked at the notebook, then at Rowan, then at Adeline. She met his eyes steadily and didn't say anything. Something in Malcolm's posture shifted, not a collapse, not a dramatic moment, just the subtle settling of a man whose frame has been holding a certain tension for a long time and has finally run out of reason to maintain it. I need a lawyer, he said. That's your right, Rowan said. We'll call one when we call the police, which will be shortly. He moved to the door and looked at Damon. Stay here, Damon nodded. He was doing the thing Rowan had observed him do over the past several days, converting competitive instinct into operational focus, redirecting the energy that had previously gone toward territorial resistance into something more useful. He stood near Malcolm's chair with the physical certainty of a man who had finally found a clear opponent and was relieved about it. Rowan stepped out of the security office and into the terminal's small waiting area. Adeline followed him. He'd expected that. The waiting area was empty beige carpet, rows of connected seating, windows looking out onto the tarmac where the grounded jet sat dark and patient. There was a vending machine in the corner that offered 4 choices of mediocre snacks and a coffee option that Rowan would have evaluated skeptically under better circumstances. The airport sounds distant, mechanical, the background noise of a facility built for transit filtered through the walls. Adeline stopped a few feet away from him and looked at him for a moment without speaking. He waited. Are you hurt? She asked. Jaw, he said. It's fine. She looked at his jaw, then away toward the tarmac window. They had my digital credentials, she said. They generated the security order using my own authorization signature. Every guard who followed that order today was following what appeared to be a legitimate command from the CEO. She was working through the implications in real time, which was how her mind operated not after the fact but during, processing and filing simultaneously. How long has Malcolm had access to my credential system? I don't know yet, Rowan said, but the credential compromise is probably how he coordinated the scheduling leaks too. If he had a backdoor into your authorization system, he could generate valid-looking orders and distribute schedule information under your signature without triggering an internal flag. She absorbed that. My own name, she said mostly to herself. He was running this operation under my name. He was running it through your name, Rowan said. There's a difference, and the board will understand it when the documentation is in front of them. He paused. Speaking of which, we need to get back to headquarters before Conrad hears about the airfield. She turned to look at him. He'll already know. Malcolm would have been reporting to him in real time, which means Conrad is currently deciding how to handle the fact that his mechanism failed, Rowan said. He has 2 options. Cut Malcolm loose and deny everything, or accelerate the board motion before we can bring what we have into the room. Given that the board session he's requested is... Rowan checked his phone being formally scheduled for tomorrow morning. He'll likely try to accelerate. Tomorrow morning, she said, yes. She was quiet for a moment. Then, what do we have that's clean enough for the board? Not recordings of tarmac confrontations. Something they can put in front of a governance committee. The routing slips are documented and physical. The motor pool access logs are in the system. Torres is still working on the financial thread, the money that funded the external operations. Rowan looked at her. The financial link is the piece that completes it. If we can show Conrad's money moving to the external operatives, we have a conspiracy with a paper trail that goes straight to him, not just to Malcolm. And if Torres doesn't have it by tomorrow morning, then we go into the room with what we have and we control the presentation. She held his eyes. That's not a guarantee. No, he said. It's not. She appreciated that. He knew not the answer, but the honesty of it. She'd told him once, obliquely, that she'd spent most of her professional life surrounded by people who gave her guarantees because they thought that was what she needed, and that those guarantees had taught her to distrust anyone who delivered them too readily. All right, she said, let's go. They called the police from the terminal. 2 units arrived within 11 minutes, which was reasonably fast considering the location, and Rowan walked the first officer through the documentation with the specific patience of someone who has had to explain complex situations to people with authority who need the information compressed and clear. Malcolm was taken into custody without incident. Harmon and Weeks were taken separately, as witnesses rather than suspects, and given the choice that junior participants in these situations are usually given full cooperation or full exposure with the predictable result. Damon rode back to headquarters with Rowan and Adeline. He sat in the back seat and was quiet for most of the drive, which was unusual enough that Rowan glanced at him in the rearview mirror twice. Say it, Rowan said. Damon looked up from somewhere inside his own thoughts. I ran his detail for 3 years, he said. Malcolm's. I ran logistics for his division for 2 years before that. 5 years, and I didn't see it. He was careful, Rowan said. I should have been more careful, Damon said. Rowan considered that. There were a few things he could say about how sophisticated long-term deception worked, about how familiarity created blind spots, about how even trained people missed what they weren't looking for. All of those things were true. He said something different instead. You turned when it mattered. Damon looked at him. When you understood what was happening, Rowan said, you turned. That's the relevant thing. A pause. Damon looked back out the window. She almost got on that plane, he said. She didn't, Adeline said from the front passenger seat, without looking back. Her voice was even. Let's stay with what happened rather than what almost did. They reached headquarters at 7:10 in the evening. The building's lobby was staffed by overnight security, and several of them watched the 3 of them walk in with the particular attention of people who've been hearing things through the building's internal communication network all afternoon and are trying to reconcile the rumors, with the actual humans now standing in front of them. Rowan ignored it. He went to the operations center, where Torres had been running his financial thread since mid-afternoon, and sat down across from him. Torres looked like he'd consumed a significant quantity of caffeine over the past several hours and was now operating on the specific high-altitude alertness of someone running on stimulants and professional pride in equal measure. He had 4 screens open and a legal pad covered in handwritten notations. Tell me you have something, Rowan said. I have something, Torres said. It took longer than I wanted, because the money moved through 3 intermediate accounts, 2 domestic shells and 1 overseas holding entity, registered in a jurisdiction that doesn't prioritize disclosure. But the trail is there. The original funding source traces to a private discretionary account held by a trust structure associated with Conrad Marwick's family holdings. He pulled up a document on the nearest screen. 3 wire transfers over 8 weeks. Total sum sufficient to cover the external operatives, the hardware, the credential production, and the fake press distribution. He paused. It's not a clean forensic accounting chain. You'd want a financial investigator to formalize it. But as circumstantial documentation for a board presentation, it's solid. Rowan looked at the screen for a moment. Then he sat back. That was the piece. The financial thread that ran from the GPS transmitter in Adeline's wheel well, through Malcolm's network of external operatives, back through 3 shell structures to Conrad Marwick's private accounts. It wasn't airtight. Torres was right about that. It would need professional forensic analysis to be prosecution ready, but it was enough. It was more than enough for a boardroom. He called Adeline. She arrived in the operations center 8 minutes later, with Bess behind her, carrying a legal notepad and the expression of someone who had resigned themselves to a very long evening. Rowan walked her through Torres's findings. She listened, asked 3 specific questions about the documentation format and the source verification, and then stood still for a moment looking at the screen. Okay, she said. Just that. Okay, he'd learned that when she said it in that particular tone, flat, final, No inflection, it wasn't acceptance. It was the sound of a decision being made. "I want this package tonight," she said to Torres. "Everything documented, everything labeled, everything sourced. I want a board presentation package that a governance committee member can read in 15 minutes and understand completely without me in the room explaining it." She looked at Rowan. "And I want you in the room tomorrow explaining it anyway." "I'll be there," he said. The package took 3.5 hours to build. Rowan, Torres, Nora, who'd come to headquarters as soon as she'd confirmed the recording from the airfield was intact and backed up in 3 separate locations, and Adeline's legal team all worked through it. The physical routing slips were photographed and cataloged. The access logs were formatted with timestamps and cross-references. The financial documentation was organized in a sequence that started with the end result and traced backward to the source, which was the most readable way to present it to a board that was going to be looking for a linear story. It wasn't a clean process. There were disagreements about which documents led and which were supporting material. Torres's financial documentation required 2 revisions when Adeline's legal team identified formatting inconsistencies that might invite credibility questions from Conrad's camp. The physical routing slips, once photographed, created a question about chain of custody that Nora had to address by documenting the archive retrieval process with timestamps and 2 witnesses. At 1:15 in the morning, Adeline looked up from the table where they'd been working and said, "That's enough. If it's not right now, more time won't fix it." She was correct. Over-preparation at the margins was a way of managing anxiety, not improving outcomes. They had what they had, and what they had was substantial. Rowan drove home at 1:30. He sat in his parked car in front of his building for 3 minutes before going inside, which was a habit he'd developed without realizing it, a decompression period between the world of the work and the world of the apartment, where Cassidy kept her jazz records and her cat and her deliberate, cheerful ordinariness that he'd been relying on as a counterweight for 11 years. He texted her, "Home, everything is okay. Cat okay?" She replied in 40 seconds she was still awake, which he'd expected. "Cat is fine. You look rough in that photo Damon sent me. I have opinions. Go to sleep." He looked at that for a moment. Damon had sent her a photo. Of all the things that had happened in the last 16 hours, that one sat somewhere unexpected, the fact that Damon had thought to do it. Had thought that Cassidy would want to know that her father was physically intact, had made that small human gesture in the middle of everything else. He went upstairs. He did not sleep well, which was normal, but he slept. The board session was called for 9 in the morning. Rowan arrived at Northstar at 7:30, which gave him 90 minutes to walk the building, check the security configuration, confirm that Malcolm's remaining subordinates had been suspended pending investigation, and stand in the corridor outside the boardroom for 10 minutes thinking about what he was about to walk into. Conrad Marwick arrived at 8:50 with 2 lawyers and the bearing of a man who had spent the night preparing arguments and was still confident in them. He was 61, silver-haired like Malcolm but more polished, with the patrician self-assurance of someone who has spent decades in rooms where status was the default currency. He didn't look at Rowan when he passed in the corridor. He looked at him the way a man looks at furniture, briefly, categorically, then not at all. Rowan filed that away and followed him in. The boardroom held 14 members plus Adeline at the head of the table. Conrad sat at the opposite end, not the designated seat of a board chair, which he wasn't, but a position at the table's far end that put him in visual opposition to Adeline, which was presumably intentional. His 2 lawyers sat against the wall behind him. Adeline opened the session herself, which was her right as CEO. She was brief, she acknowledged the photographs, acknowledged the questions they'd raised, and told the board she had documentation she intended to present before any vote on Conrad's suspension motion was considered. Conrad interrupted before she'd finished her second sentence. The chair, he said, should acknowledge that the CEO has a material conflict of interest in presenting documentation that concerns allegations about her own conduct. The documentation concerns allegations about your conduct, Conrad, Adeline said, and then moved past it without pausing, which was exactly the right approach. Acknowledge, redirect, don't get caught in a procedural argument when you have the substance. Rowan presented the material in the order they'd organized the night before, access logs first, because they were the most legible and the most self-explanatory, routing slips second, because the dated physical record created a timeline, financial documentation third, because it was the most complex but also the most conclusive. He was not a practiced public speaker. He was aware of that as a limitation, and managed it by staying close to the documents themselves, pointing at specific pages, reading specific dates, not editorializing. The board needed to see the structure, not be persuaded by his delivery. He'd been talking for 22 minutes when Conrad interrupted again. None of this, Conrad said, addresses the fundamental question of this CEO's judgment. Whatever Malcolm Vane may or may not have done independently, he put weight on independently. A small but deliberate word choice. The photographs show Adeline conducting undisclosed meetings with foreign capital. The meetings are disclosed, Adeline said. 3 filings in the board record, all within governance policy, all pre-approved by the investment committee. The photographs show context that was manufactured by selective framing. She opened a file in front of her. The same event, different camera position. She slid the file to the board chair. In it were photographs from Northstar's official event coverage from the same fundraiser, the same conversation between Adeline and Gerhard Steele, shot from the event photographer's standard position, showing the full room, the other guests visible, the open and unremarkable nature of what was in the manipulated images made to look intimate. Conrad looked at the file. His expression didn't change, but something around his eyes tightened. One of the board members, a woman named Chastain, who ran the governance committee and whose neutrality Rowan had assessed as genuine, said, "The routing slips in the documentation. These are physical documents from the internal archive." "Yes," Nora said from her seat along the wall. "Retrieved by me from the third-floor archive under Standard Operations Authority. The retrieval is time-stamped and witnessed." "And the financial documentation," Chastain said. "This traces Conrad's private accounts to the external operation. It traces a trust structure associated with his family holdings," Rowan said. "We want to be specific about what the document shows. It's a forensic pathway, not a finalized accounting. We're recommending independent financial investigation to complete the chain." Chastain looked at Conrad. Conrad was looking at the financial documentation with the expression of a man calculating the distance between where he is and where he thought he was going to be when he woke up this morning. The calculation was not going in his favor, and the expression showed it, despite his obvious effort to prevent that. "This is circumstantial." One of Conrad's allies on the board said a man named Phelps, who'd been nodding along to Conrad's position since the session opened. "An internal recording from an airfield confrontation, physical documents from an administrative archive, financial documentation that by your own admission isn't finalized. It's enough to warrant an independent investigation," Chastain said, cutting Phelps off cleanly. "Which is the standard we apply. We don't convict in this room, we investigate. And the documentation presented this morning clears that bar by a significant margin." Phelps looked unhappy. Conrad said nothing. Then Conrad said, "Before any investigation proceeds, the board should be aware of information regarding the individual who assembled this documentation, and who has been placed in a position of trust by this CEO." He opened a folder of his own. "Rowan Striker, former military. His service record was sealed. I obtained a summary through a private research firm." He looked at Rowan directly for the first time. "He was formally investigated for abandoning his position during an active operation in which a fellow service member was killed. The investigation resulted in a sealed adverse finding and the termination of his military career." The room was quiet. Rowan stood at the front of it. He could feel the weight of the silence, the board members looking at him, recalibrating the particular quality of doubt that a disclosed secret creates even in people who know intellectually that disclosed secrets aren't the same as proven facts. Conrad knew exactly what he was doing. He was introducing a stain. Stains didn't need to be true. They just needed to exist. Adeline didn't speak immediately. She was watching Rowan. He looked back at her for 1 second. Then he turned to the board. "The sealed record is accurate in one respect," Rowan said. "My military career ended after a formal investigation into my conduct during an operation in which my teammate Elias Mercer was killed." He paused. He was aware of his own voice, flat, controlled, the voice he'd spent 11 years using to discuss things he didn't want to discuss, because they required a precision that emotion would erode. "The investigation found that I had abandoned my position. The finding was wrong. It was based on a route leak. Someone fed our operational approach to hostile parties before the mission, which is why the corridor Elias entered was not clear. I was ordered to my position. The man who framed me for abandonment was the same man who helped engineer the route leak." Another pause. "That man," Rowan said, "is Malcolm Vane, who was working as a private security contractor with access to military operational networks 11 years ago. through the same defense-adjacent channels that eventually led him to Northstar. The same man who installed a GPS tracker in this CEO's vehicle coordinated 3 external attacks against her and attempted to remove her from this building under a forged authorization this afternoon. He let that sit for a moment. Conrad found my sealed record, Rowan said. He found it because Malcolm still had access to the source. Malcolm gave it to Conrad as a weapon for exactly this moment because they knew that if they couldn't stop the documentation, they could try to discredit the man who assembled it. He looked at Conrad steadily. The record that destroyed my career was generated by the same conspiracy you're asking this board to ignore. The room was very quiet. Chastain looked at Conrad for a long time. Conrad's face had passed through several stages over the past 40 seconds and had arrived at a carefully held neutrality that was doing its best to look like composure. His lawyers were both leaning toward him, one of them speaking quietly into his ear. Conrad made a small gesture with one hand, the gesture of a man declining a suggestion, and sat back slightly. "I'd like to call for a recess," Conrad said. "The motion on the table is your suspension request against the CEO," Chastain said. "Do you wish to withdraw it?" A long pause. The kind of pause that has texture to it, the weight of a calculation being completed, the sound of a position being conceded without the words being said. "I withdraw the motion," Conrad said. Chastain looked at Adeline. "The board will be commissioning an independent investigation into the matters presented this morning, including the external operation against the CEO's office, the financial documentation regarding private accounts, and the historical military matter referenced in this session." She looked at Rowan when she said the last part. Not unkindly. "The CEO retains full operational authority pending that investigation." Adeline nodded once. Rowan looked at his hands. They were steady, which they always were. He'd always been grateful for that whatever the inside was doing, the outside held. 2 board members asked Conrad directly whether he intended to retain legal counsel for the investigation, which was a question whose subtext was clear and whose implication Conrad understood. He answered carefully, in the measured tones of a man now speaking entirely for a record. The session closed at 11:40. In the corridor outside, Adeline walked beside Rowan toward the elevator. Nora was behind them. Torres was somewhere behind Nora. Damon was at the far end of the corridor talking to Chastain, who'd stopped him on the way out. Rowan didn't know what that conversation was, but Damon's posture had a quality he hadn't seen in it before. Something that looked less like territorial defense and more like professional purpose. Adeline didn't speak until they were in the elevator. Just the 2 of them. The doors closed. "Elias Mercer," she said. "Yes," Rowan said. "You've been carrying that for 11 years. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. The elevator moved. "I'm sorry," she said. Not as a formality, as a specific, direct statement, the kind she made when she meant something precisely and wanted it received precisely. He didn't know what to do with that, which was itself information. He'd gotten very good at operating inside difficulty and not particularly good at being seen inside it. He looked at the elevator doors. "It's not over," he said. "The investigation will take time." "I know," she said. "Malcolm's lawyers will complicate the military connection. The forensic accounting will need a professional firm." He was doing the thing he always did, moving into logistics when the conversation got personal, covering the exposed territory with operational content. He was aware of doing it. He kept doing it anyway. Adeline looked at him sideways. "Rowan, yes, stop planning for a moment." He stopped. The elevator arrived at the executive floor. The doors opened. Neither of them moved immediately. "Thank you," she said. She said it simply, which was harder than the formal version would have been. "For all of it. For not leaving when they gave you a reason to." He looked at her. Her face was exactly as composed as it always was, and exactly as complicated underneath that as he'd learned it was. "I wasn't going to leave," he said. The doors began to close. He put his hand out and held them open. They walked out together into the corridor, and behind them, the elevator closed and descended, and the building was quiet, and somewhere below them, the city was doing what cities did, indifferent, continuous, entirely unaware of what had just been resolved inside one boardroom on one floor of one building, and how long it had been waiting to be resolved, and how many years of silence it had taken to finally arrive at a morning where the truth was said out loud in a room full of people who had the authority to do something about it.